So if we could please start with Bernice. Bernice, could you give us some feedback, please? We can't hear you. I can't. Can you hear me?
Sorry, yeah. Nabila, do you want to do that as you took the notes?
Hang on. Yeah, just so education particularly strongly was coming out of there. It felt a bit rushed. It felt like people had a lot more to say on the subject, that there's a lot of strong feelings and thoughts on the subject, and we're just trying to get a bit of that from this time. And there was a lot of conversation about the big structural issues and needing equally seismic movement, say politically, to change these systemic structural issues. There was a dialogue on BAME as a descriptor, not recognizing the diversity, particular histories and stories, and the desire to move away from it, to sort of look at people for who they are and what they are, their stories. There was talk about housing and poverty and the relationship between poverty and poor living conditions and health, and also people accessing mental health, and actually how often it seems to be that people enter criminal justice system, and that is when they are identified as having a mental health need, and that this needs to be earlier. There's a lot of worry, I think, about actually that we're talking about this issue, and is it going to translate? Are we going to have receipts? That we wanted to move from a dialogue into a reality and find ways of working to make it a reality. And also about history, there was a talk of Mary Seacole and other Black people, and learning about them at late stages in life, when someone went back to university, and needing this to be part of. So there was quite a lot we got in that short period, actually.
Thank you. Thank you, Nabila. Richard and Debbie, can we have just something that stood out for you, please?
Yeah, so in our group, we had a lot of people. Well, I think overwhelmingly everybody was really moved by, by people's accounts of of their experiences and what they've been through. Somebody, I feel like a lot of people were sorry, a lot. It was, people could were really tapped into the emotion that was elicited by what was said, and it was something to be experienced. Flo especially was even though she was very moved, and she was actually incensed by the experience that you'd experienced, Florence. Even though she recognized how moving the whole thing had been, but she also said that it wouldn't be proper to retaliate with force, but instead it's actually discussion of what's been, and how we can actually move forward from that.
I think it's about moving forward. It's not about what happened. That happened to me about 2011. I've never spoken to anybody. That was my first time. That's why it was emotional. I don't live in that world. What I'm doing now is to make it better for our young people and the future and our communities. And that is the focus.
There was also a lot of mention on the importance of seeing yourself reflected, and your reality actually being portrayed in different forms of media, like specifically literature. There was some talk on on libraries, and how in 2019 only about 5% of characters in literature were actually from the BAME community. So there's a lot of talk about the need for more reflection. Just expressing these in those avenues.
Well, thank you. Natalie and Teddy, can we have some feedback of what stood out from our group? Thanks a lot, Ebe. Thank you.
Hello, Flo. Unfortunately, Natalie had some technical difficulties, but thankfully we were still able to proceed with the discussion. And again, in our group, education stood out quite forcefully. One uh, term which was used for me was quite profound: the school to prison pipeline, which reflects, of course, what happens after permanent exclusions, the number of young people who then end up in the prison population. So education was a big part of our discussion. People were really moved by the power of sharing lived experiences, but also it was felt among our group that the time for polite conversation and just talking is over, and now is the time for bold action to make changes. And so the group are recommending that as a follow-up to this conference, there should be, as an action following up this conference, there should be a discussion among the political directorate, leaders in the political directorate, and significant organizations like fire and rescue, the police, the NHS, and so on, faith leaders, about how we can build community cohesion and get that back on the agenda. Because one point which was made was that there are people, many people in Gloucestershire and Cheltenham, for example, who don't really interact with or experience any kind of opportunities to interact with people from BAME communities. So the dialogue about community cohesion needs to get back on the agenda, and we're recommending that that is a follow-up action. Another follow-up which was recommended was that it is believed that head teachers from schools in the area were invited and not many were represented. So therefore, we're asking that a letter be sent to the head teachers to ask, well, why was there no representation? This is an important issue, especially the issue of education. This is about your pupils that you have a duty of care for. And we are discussing matters about how we can move things on for them. So a letter to head teachers finding out why there was no representation, how they propose, I'm adding this, how they propose to therefore participate in this dialogue going forward.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Teddy. Thank you. Such a shame we couldn't hear you, so we didn't hear you speak, but thanks a lot for your contribution. Jermaine and Louise, could you give us your feedback, please, of what stood out from your group?
Yeah, of course. So one of the things that we were considering was inclusion versus diversity, and I think we came to the conclusion that there are clear differences between those two things. And one way to improve inclusion within all of our workplaces is to empower our diverse workforce and listen to them on issues of diversity and inclusion. I think in social care, they're going to look at improving cultural awareness of their staff and social workers. In schools, we spoke about, I think we're quite pragmatic in understanding that we can't change the world, but what schools can do is you can diversify your reading list a little bit, so that if there are just 2 or 3 Black or mixed race families in your school, they see themselves represented in even that slightly more diverse reading list. And similarly, when you bring speakers into school, whether they're the police or whether they are fire and rescue, whoever it is, having a diverse list of people coming in. And lastly, we spoke about advocacy services for parents whose children are struggling and at risk of exclusion. Exclusion's very, very important, and so we were asking and consider the advocacy services that and often more deprived with concerns if and when they're struggling. So I think they were some of the things. And then Mark had a couple of points from a faith perspective. I'm not sure if he's still here. I can't see.
Okay. Thanks, Javin. I mean, just to reiterate, you mentioned about if there's a few people, pupils in the school from diverse backgrounds for school to have a reading list. But for me, I think it's one of those things that it doesn't need to be specific. We've curated a list for the whole school because it's the experience of the child moving forward. These are the next leaders in the future. We have to prepare them for the world. So all children should be able to read diverse books. It's one of the things that after researching, I was very disappointed. I didn't realize how big a problem it was until I started doing Black History Month, and parents would be asking me about where can we get these books. It's only when I spoke to young people in Gloucestershire, in Cheltenham, that I came to find out is a huge gap. I grew up in Kenya, obviously, so I wouldn't have known. But even though I read Enid Blyton, I also had oral stories from our communities. So in that way, I was enriched in both. So why can't we ensure that all our young people are able? I went to the school library conference and curated that specifically so that no teacher would tell me that we don't know where to find the books. So just to put here there, Toby, could you please give us some feedback from our group? Thanks.
Of course, just bear with me. So I've made some notes. We had some really good insights. We've been really fortunate to have a lot of people who have a huge amount of expertise in dealing with situations like this. Particularly, Angelica said that she's leading a group that covers most of the southwest and works directly with students. So they've been putting together focus groups and developing strategies so that they can really concretely put together a range of offerings that can actually directly help people. They've developed networking, and it's very student-led development as well. So it just kind of means that they're working across communities and signposting to available resources. One of their strongest elements has been the idea for the induction guide, which kind of helps students to learn about different resources that are available to them, and just making sure that everyone is as well provided for. It's kind of an ongoing work, but it's just something that can really enrich people's lives and just kind of help, just as Florence was saying before, help people sort of speaking the same language and just making sure that they can coordinate well with each other. We also had so from Gloucester City Homes as well. This is just a process of looking at staff members and making sure that we're recruiting equitably and fairly, and just making sure that there are surveys being conducted with anonymised results. So if anyone has any concerns about the ways that they are experiencing their job, they can make sure that it's raised to managers without any kind of without having to feel uncomfortable in doing so. So it's just kind of making sure that we're centering people in the discussions that really need to have their voices and their ideas shared. So it's just quite exciting that there are definitely kind of it's easy in some ways to feel overwhelmed, but there's quite a lot of concrete actions that can be taken just by centering the voices in communities and just making sure that those voices are uplifted and amplified.
Well, thanks a lot, Tabe. Thank you. And I think just to summarize generally, I think one of the things that we should remember, we should just think beyond that. Okay, we are organizations. People are here representative organization, but at the same time, you are an individual, and as well, you are in a family setting. So you can do something about it as an individual. You can do something about it from an organization, from the top, from an organization point of view, or you can do something about it from a community point of view, whether it's school, it's church. You can do something independently. It's the little steps that we take that will make change happen. And it doesn't need to go to an organization. You have the power to choose to make that change. Okay. Yeah, just to summarize then. Oh, sorry. Mary and Maureen have not spoken. Sorry. No. Mary and Maureen, who's giving us feedback?
Do you want to give, Maureen? Do you want me to give it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Mary, please.
You can chip in if I've left anything. Very fortunate we had leaders, directors in our group, so leaders and policymakers, people who are actually able to strategize and make effective change. One of the things that stood out again, education, that overexploitation and how this are represented significantly in for most. About was COVID and COVID on Ben communities. It was good to know that there is some work being done in the police where there is something they call Better Together, and that is a strategy they have in terms of helping them recruit, particularly people from the communities. So that was fantastic to know. But then in terms of tangible things to progress further, one of the things that stood up from Barnwood community homes was I really like that, taking ownership and not really delegating this, because we come up with this and we just go and delegate them. But then it's about wanting that change yourself and taking that ownership and actually going there and effecting change. So that was really good to know. We had a director from Cheltenham Borough Council who talked about a budding system where we have probably somebody who's coming to work with us from the Bain community, and they have a budding system where other who probably have the knowledge, have the expertise, or not necessarily them being Bain, but just almost making them feel comfortable within that surrounding. This was really good. I like this one. So Director of Public Health talked about our cultural competence. They talk about this in their work, and we talk about cultural competence and cultural sensitivity. But what stood out was having those listening sessions and being comfortable in the discomfort of those conversations. One of the things I know is that what has really impacted change is a lot of people are very worried about the things they say, and they think, my goodness, I will come across as racist, or it's appropriate to say this. And so people just say, okay, I'm not going to talk about it. I don't want to talk something that will be hurtful to people, and they just not talk. But this was really good in terms of really understanding that Director of Public Health is ready to be comfortable in the discomfort and open to learning and ready to be corrected. And I think that's really good. And then there was opportunities to express, where people can be able to express themselves. Another thing that stood out is recruitment process. Maureen, do you want to talk about the recruitment process with the director of Cheltenham Borough Homes talked about?
Yes, we're talking about, sorry, I'm stuck at it. Yes, recruitment. The recruitment and application process that are in companies or organizations. And he said that he had already started the work and he had already asked the question, but it's like that had not been followed up and it has like been shelved. So he wants to go and find out and like get it down from the shelf, and actually something should be done about it, that people would be able to just be recruited and not just to be judged by their names or where they come from, which was a very interesting thing to do. He also spoke about the mentorship, which was the budding, which Mary spoke about a minute ago. And he even said that how do we connect the mentors and the mentees? Even there are people that who they need mentorship, but they don't even know that they require mentorship. So how is it that, how can they connect these two people together? And somebody mentioned about the mentoring that is happening, senior mentoring that is happening in the NHS. So there is work that is being done and good progress. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Maureen, and thank you for great feedback, and thanks everybody for their contribution. We'll look into that, and then it's Darren. Yeah, Darren will speak to us.
Hello, everybody. I'm Darren Knight, Director of Cheltenham Borough Council. Just want to express my sincere thanks for everybody who's taken part this evening. It's very much appreciated. Huge thank you to our speakers, and also special thank you for Florence for being an excellent chair this evening. So thank you very much. And from personal level, I've really enjoyed this evening's conference. It's been very insightful. And also thank you for the team at Cheltenham Borough Council for doing all the logistics and helping to organise, and for anybody else who have missed off for their help in organising today's conference. It is really appreciated. And I think there's a lot to take forward. So thank you.
Just to summarize, it's been great having this moment. For me, most importantly, because it's something I hadn't spoken to for so many years. And for me personally, it's time to, move forward and see the great work that we can all do together. And it's not that one person can do it. We all have to work in hand and work together in order to achieve good for our community. You have given up your time to come to this conference today. You have listened, and also you've had a chance to hold some discussion. The community in Cheltenham, all the outpouring support we had, you've watched what we had at Pittville. This has all been great, and we've listened to the issues that community are facing. The decision makers have also been able to participate, and we are really grateful for giving up your time. Our young people of Cheltenham, of the BAME community, spoke about their experiences in the video. BAME families have shown their support for lending their voice and expertise over the last few months to make this conference happen. And Cheltenham Borough Council has taken action by committing to combat racial injustice locally and supporting to host this event. So we are asking you as decision makers to join this movement and take action for equitable futures for our youth, our families, and workers, so that we can see the real tangible change that we need. To wrap up, I want to leave you with this quote by James Baldwin. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced. We can't protect our children and future generations from every hardship they are facing growing up, including racism, but nothing will change unless we face the problems that we can control. So for everyone who's listening today, who wants to take progressive action for equitable futures for all, join us in setting up the Cheltenham Alliance for Race and Equity. Cheltenham Alliance for Race and Equity, because I believe you care. A committee that will work for the interests of the culturally diverse communities in Cheltenham. I know some of you have come from Gloucester, but you are welcome to be part of Cheltenham. Let this be the conference that will set the tone for equitable opportunities, equitable education, equitable living, equitable health outcomes, and equitable futures. I want to thank all of you for taking time to be here, to be present, to listen. I want to thank Cheltenham Council and Cheltenham Welcome Refugees, our community members who've been fantastic in giving up their time. I want to thank Rami, who set up the great videos, and Jolly Good Design for designing our program. I will now pass on to Jermaine, and thank you very much for everybody who listened and giving your time. And I'll just pass to Jermaine to give the final thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Thank you, everybody. So as we come to an end, and I realize we're a little bit over, I'm just going to end with a quick, this is a call to action. I think it's fair to say that discrimination is rife across the UK. Throughout the last 2 hours, we've heard real stories from real people on the impacts of often unknowing and unassuming oppression on their lives. We've heard about the impacts of people throughout their lifespan, from healthcare to education, mental health, policing and more, but we could equally talk about the effects of politics in local and national, the workplace, media, sport, hospitality, but we don't have time for all of that. So this is a call to action. I'd like to think that we're all here to support marginalised communities across Cheltenham. So as Florence said, we're setting up the committee. And the idea of the committee is to hold individuals and organisations to account and ensure that any suggested actions that we've come up with today are followed up on. We want organisations and institutions represented here to work with our committee, to work with the steering group, to support you in implementing the things that you suggested you will do. So what we're going to do is in the next few days, we'll contact everybody with a short few questions to see if you can join in with the steering group and help to make sure that there's meaningful change that's lasting in Cheltenham and Gloucestershire and hopefully more widely. Have a good evening, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.